Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for a panel discussion. It's a technical and expert's insight on the current geopolitical situation in the Middle East and how that's affecting our shipping and oil and gas clients. So before we proceed, let me introduce everyone. So on the panel we have Andy Hopkinson, who is Managing Director at Safina, Carl Barnes, Head of Marine Consultancy, and myself, John Wilshire, Business Development Manager and subject matter expert on oil and gas. The reason we thought it'd be good to have a seminar, obviously the challenges for the marine and offshore energy are significant with the disruption of the Straits of Hormuz and the conflict in the Middle East. And this prolonged blockage and disruption creates a range of coating-related problems that are often indirect but can be very commercially significant for clients. These issues can become major technical, operational and legal risks for marine and energy assets. So what we'd like to do today is discuss them and give you the insights from what we are seeing from our client base and how we can support. So to go straight to probably the most significant one, obviously the increased vessel time for vessels in the Gulf can cause accelerated biofouling, hull coating degradation and significant fouling problems. So I'd like to hand over to our Head of Marine Consultancy, Carl Barnes, to talk through more of the issues and what we're seeing and how we can support.
Thanks, John. Well, firstly, I think it's worth pointing out that the Persian Gulf is probably one of the worst fouling challenge locations in the world. Typically, the seawater temperatures, and certainly now, can be in excess of 30 degrees. And what I've found over the many years in this industry is barnacle fouling is extremely prevalent in that area. So vessels sitting with anti-fouling coatings that would have typical static guarantees could be maybe up to about 30 days. So there's plenty of products around there that have static guarantees up to 30 days. And there is some with longer as well, but probably the majority of the market, the static guarantees are generally around about 30 or under in terms of how long the vessel is. The anti-fouling is actually guaranteed to sit static in a particular location. Now, that location, as I mentioned before, is a very tough anti-fouling challenge area. And some of those guarantees may not be applicable in that area as well, or the numbers are actually reduced. So vessels sitting there, they've been sitting there for many months now. The likelihood is those hulls will have started to foul. It's going to be a real challenge for those ships that when they go back into service, most likely having mature barnacles on the hull, which one will cause significant drag for the vessel when she goes back into service. But when trying to clean those, to remove them, they're going to damage the hull coatings. And if you damage the hull coatings to the extent of removing barnacles, the most likely, the best thing you can do really is literally have to go to a dry dock, because the hull coatings are going to be badly damaged and they will just generally foul again very quickly, even during short static periods. So a big challenge for all of those tankers that have been sat there for many months. They're going to be, a lot of those ships are going to be fouled. They're going to have significant drag because of that fouling, and it's not going to be easy to remove the fouling either. So I think there's a lot of ships going to be in a pretty bad way once things start moving again.
Do you see many disputes between charterers and owners? Because I guess each charter party will have a static agreement. Any comments on that?
There will. It's a very good one, John, because a lot of these charter party static guarantees tend to be the same number across these charters, irrespective of what anti-fouling coatings applied. So typically, when we see charter party agreements, we typically see things like 20 days, 25 days. Now, the ships have sat certainly well beyond that, and whether there's any other clauses in these things for, acts of war, etc., that might help in terms of, what the charter is actually liable for. But for me, of all of the static periods in all of the charter party agreements I've seen, the ships have gone well past that. I think there's going to be a lot of problems between owners and charters, and who's actually to pick up that bill, because there's a cleaning bill and then there's the damage to the hull coatings as well, and who's actually going to be responsible for that. There's plenty of proactive owners, charterers, etc., who are actually thinking about this and saying, look, if we have to clean our vessel, where can we clean it and what's the best way to clean it? Now, it obviously depends on what fouling's attached. If it's a weed type fouling, it's generally a bit easier, but If you've got barnacle fouling that's been on for a number of months, well, unfortunately, it turns out you're going to need something like, aggressive wire type brushes to remove that. And then there's obviously a knock-on effect for the coatings, because generally a soft brush will not remove a mature barnacle, or you're going to have to use extremely high pressure water jetting type cleaning as well. But again, the likelihood is that is also going to cause damage to the anti-fouling systems. But yes, we've seen a number of inquiries about this, of how do we clean the vessels, and what fouling are we actually expecting there. The other question we're getting as well is where can we actually clean the vessel, because not everywhere in the world you can clean and just drop the fouling where you are. You might have to use capture techniques, etc. So there's a lot of complications that owners are trying to think about at the moment.
On the same topic, once the clean's done, depending on which area the ship's going to, there might be biofouling management reporting and biofouling management plans that need looking at. Is there anything we can do, or have we had requests to help in that area?
Yes, we've had requests of how these biofouling management plans could be filled in, what the information needs to go in there. The other thing we're getting as well is for ships that might be wanting once they've left this area, etc., and potentially trading in certain areas of the world that have very strict requirements for entry into their waters. So the US, New Zealand, Australia, those sort of places, you have to ensure that or prove that your hull is actually clean of biofouling before entering into these waters. So we've had a number of inquiries about that, as what can we do, and what can we expect on the hull, and where can we actually clean that, so we're not going to be denied entry into certain territorial waters. The exact opposite of static periods is something we've seen. So ships that might have to take longer trading routes now is the complete opposite of a static period. So what we're seeing with ships on longer trading routes is they're more active, they're traveling further with their speeds, etc. And what's that having is the exact opposite on the anti-fouling system. So the anti-fouling system's been applied for a particular speed and activity of the ship, but the ships are now doing more sea miles because of longer trading routes. So the anti-fouling systems don't effectively have enough anti-fouling thickness on that scheme to cope with that extra sea miles that they're doing. So what we'll be starting to see there with that is early polish through of the anti-fouling system before the ships goes into dry dock. So the anti-fouling polishing away, because the ship's doing more sea miles per month because of these longer trading routes. If the anti-fouling system polishes away, you're ultimately just exposing the tie coat, and then the tie coat has no fouling protection at all, and you'll get fouling on the tie coat, even during a very short static period of just a short port entry. So it's the exact opposite, really, of long static periods. There's just the anti-fouling system isn't enough to cope with a longer trading route. There is other things to think about as well. So in terms of static periods, obviously there's cargoes on ships, and I think Andy's got some good examples of where the ship's been static and it's had a knock-on effect of how long that cargo's had to sit on the ship for.
Yeah, absolutely, Carl. It's a good point. The functional space, whether it be dry bulk cargoes, or whether it be liquid cargoes, typically those cargoes are tested by paint manufacturers, and they're certified through guidance lists or cargo resistance lists we have for liquid chemical carriers, and they will limit the amount of time certain cargoes can sit in the tanks without damaging the paint system. So when you have very aggressive chemicals, things like methanol, typically a paint manufacturer might stipulate maximum 90 days or maybe maximum 180 days carriage. And after that period, either the testing data doesn't exist, or they already know that the coating starts to deteriorate. So we're right in that time period now where vessels will have picked up liquid cargoes in the Middle East, have been stuck in the Strait of Hormuz, and are approaching this 90-day cut-off period, which is a degree of uncertainty. So we're having a lot of discussions with P&I companies who are raising that question. They need to look after the interests of their owners. We're having a lot of discussions with owners themselves. Practically, what are the options? If they can't unload the cargoes, what are the technical options they can do to minimize that risk? And also the legal companies are also asking similar questions. So it's clearly a real discussion point in the legal and insurance sectors as well. P&I clubs for definite on the cargo issues. They've been asking questions of clarity on that. Carl, I believe you've had a lot of questions from P&I companies and lawyers specifically on the charter party disputes or charter party terms.
Yes, we've seen a huge increase in that, and P&I companies have sort of certainly told us that they're extremely busy at the moment with these sort of discussions, and a charter party agreement is there and it has a static period of say 20-25 days, and the ships are sitting for a lot longer than that. So the P&I companies getting involved in here and saying, well, look, who's actually responsible for this? The ship can't move. It's up to the charterer who's got that ship chartered, but the ship can't move. So, you know, who can actually who's going to pick up this? Who's responsible for it?
You know, pretty much every stakeholder across the value chain has been affected by these sorts of disruptions, whether it be the legal, insurance, P&I companies, whether it be the owners, operators, managers, whether it be the authorities who need to permit vessels and check the cleanliness of hulls. But one we haven't talked about yet is the paint manufacturer. And actually, absolute credit to the paint manufacturers. When we went through COVID, there was a lot of discussions about products that couldn't be delivered. There was a lot of discussions about product changes on projects. We've not had that, even with the supply chain disruptions. So I'm sure the paint companies are working extremely hard in the background, or having a lot of headaches to make sure they're delivering products to projects. But they're definitely doing that. Obviously, their supply chain costs have increased. So we have seen a price increase in products, which we would all expect. But yeah, credit to the paint manufacturers for keeping the flow of products going to projects worldwide.
Question for Andy. Obviously, the geopolitical instability is changing a lot of things. I don't think anybody expected everything that happened in the Middle East. Do we see, or do we think that's going to change coating investment decisions, Andy? Can I pass over to you for that question?
Yeah, I think it does, John, and I think these global events, you know, they typically don't fall on people's risk registers. They don't expect them. You know, go back to COVID, a similar situation, Gulf of Hormuz, and the issues that we're seeing there. And I think what it starts to bring up is gaps in strategic approach to coatings. So I think if you've got an operational approach to coatings and you're using generic specifications and you're doing just enough to get from point A to point B, then you start to get a greater impact from these sorts of risks and disruptors. If you've got a more strategic approach and you take a more functional approach to specification, selection of coatings, and strategic approach to maintenance, whether it be fabric maintenance, whether it be maintenance in dry dock, then you tend to get less impacted by these shorter term effects. So I think you can kind of break the effects down into two categories. You can break them down into direct effects, like the ones Carl's talking about, you know, static periods, anti-fouling on or fouling on hulls, static periods, extended carriage of chemicals. But the indirect ones are the ones where you delay your maintenance activity or you reduce your work scope, for example. So the two main things that are driving decisions, one is high freight rates with ship operators, and the other one is high energy prices for offshore oil and gas operators. When you've got high freight rates, owners prefer to keep ships in dry dock for a shorter period of time. It's therefore kind of a pressure on companies to reduce that work scope in dry dock, get the vessel out as quickly as possible. And of course, that reduced work scope can and will have an impact, but you probably won't see that impact for 1 or 2 or 3 years. But when you do see the impact, the costs become exponential. The work scope at the next dry docking or the onboard maintenance work increase significantly, and the assets start to deteriorate more quickly. Irrespective of the conflict in Iran or COVID or whichever kind of geopolitical thing is going on, there was a need in the market anyway to move to more strategic planning on coatings. You know, that's quite clear. The upfront cost of coatings is relatively small to a project cost overall, but the downstream impacts of poor coating performance is exponential. Moving away from cost-based decisions to functional approach, risk-based assessments on technical merits of coating systems and strategies of approach to doing surface preparation and application. They've been there anyway, and these sorts of issues just emphasize why they need to be in place.